Picture this. You're sitting in a doctor's office, and they tell you that your depression, your allergies, even the way your skin reacts to sunlight, it might all be connected to ancestors who went extinct 40,000 years ago. Sounds like science fiction? Well, here's the thing. Right now, in your cells, in the very DNA that makes you who you are, there are pieces of code written by Neanderthals. Not metaphorically, literally. If you're of European or Asian descent, between 1 and 4% of your genome comes from these extinct humans. That's roughly 80 million base pairs of DNA, enough genetic material to fill about 30,000 pages if printed out. And before you think, so what? That's tiny. Consider this. That small percentage affects everything from how your immune system fights off viruses to whether you're more likely to become addicted to cigarettes. The impossible quest. Our story begins with a Swedish scientist named Svante Pääbo, who in the 1980s decided to attempt something everyone said was impossible. He wanted to extract DNA from ancient bones, specifically from our extinct cousins, the Neanderthals. Now, imagine trying to read a book that's been buried in mud for 40,000 years. The pages have crumbled to dust, the ink has faded, and what little remains is contaminated with scribbles from thousands of other books. That's essentially what Pääbo was up against. DNA degrades over time. It breaks into tiny fragments. After thousands of years, only trace amounts remain, and those traces are massively contaminated with DNA from bacteria and modern humans who've handled the bones. But Pääbo was stubborn. Actually, let me correct that. He was brilliantly stubborn. In 1997, after years of developing new techniques, he achieved his first breakthrough. Working with a 40,000-year-old bone fragment, he managed to sequence a small piece of Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA. Think about that for a second. This wasn't some pristine laboratory sample. This was genetic material that had been deteriorating since before the last ice age, since before humans had developed agriculture, writing, or civilization as we know it. The shocking revelation. Fast forward to 2010. Pääbo's team publishes something that sends shockwaves through the scientific community. They had sequenced the complete Neanderthal genome and discovered something nobody expected. Modern humans and Neanderthals had interbred. We weren't just distant cousins who'd gone our separate ways. We were family in the most literal sense. The evidence came from 3 bone samples found in a Croatian cave called Vendija. These bones contained almost 4% archaic DNA, enough to reconstruct nearly the entire Neanderthal genome. And when they compared this ancient genome to modern human DNA, the match was undeniable. Here's where it gets really interesting. The interbreeding didn't happen just once. Recent research from 2024, and I mean really recent, like just published, shows that humans and Neanderthals were getting together over a period of about 7,000 years, starting around 50,500 years ago. That's not a one-night stand. That's a long-term relationship. Your personal Neanderthal heritage. So what does this mean for you personally? Well, if your ancestors came from outside of Africa, you're carrying Neanderthal DNA right now. Europeans typically have between 1.8% and 2.4%. East Asians have even more, between 2.3% and 2.6%. That's about 20% more Neanderthal DNA than Europeans, which surprised researchers when they first discovered it. Let me put this in perspective. You probably share about 99.9% of your DNA with any other human on Earth. The 0.1% difference is what makes you unique. Your Neanderthal DNA, that 1 to 4%, is actually a huge contribution to what makes you different from other people. And here's something that might blow your mind. Collectively, if we took all the Neanderthal DNA fragments from all modern humans and pieced them together like a massive jigsaw puzzle, we could reconstruct about 35% of the complete Neanderthal genome. In other words, More than a third of Neanderthal genetic information still exists. It's just scattered across billions of people. The immune system connection. Now, let's talk about what this ancient DNA actually does in your body. One of the biggest impacts, your immune system. Remember the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, whether you had a mild case or ended up in the ICU might have been influenced by your Neanderthal genes. I'm not making this up. In 2020, researchers discovered that people carrying certain Neanderthal gene variants on chromosome 3 were significantly more likely to develop severe COVID-19. This genetic variant reaches up to 63% frequency in South Asia, particularly in Bangladesh, and about 16% in Europe. But wait, there's a plot twist. In 2021, the same researchers found another Neanderthal gene variant, this one on chromosome 12, that actually protects against severe COVID. Each copy of this protective variant reduces your risk of needing intensive care by 22%. If you inherited it from both parents, that's a 44% reduction in risk. The protective genes are called OAS1, OAS2, and OAS3, and they produce enzymes that activate a whole cascade of antiviral mechanisms in infected cells. It's like having an ancient security system that still works against modern threats. The double-edged sword. Here's where things get complicated. Those same Neanderthal genes that might protect you from some viruses can make you more susceptible to other problems. Take allergies, for instance. If you're constantly sneezing during hay fever season, you might have your Neanderthal ancestors to thank. The same immune system genes that help fight off pathogens, particularly those toll-like receptors I mentioned, can be a bit too trigger-happy. They're like an overzealous security guard who sounds the alarm for every little thing, including harmless pollen and pet dander. Researchers from the Pasteur Institute in Paris found that the genes TLR1, TLR6, and TLR10, all involved in detecting bacteria, fungi, and parasites, show some of the highest levels of Neanderthal ancestry in both Europeans and Asians. These genes sit on the surface of your cells like tiny sentinels, and the Neanderthal versions are particularly vigilant. Maybe too vigilant for modern life. The mental health mystery. But perhaps the most intriguing and concerning effects of Neanderthal DNA involve our brains and mental health. A massive study analyzing medical records of 28,000 Americans found something unexpected. Neanderthal gene variants significantly influence the risk of depression. John Capra from Vanderbilt University put it this way: the brain is an incredibly complex part of our body, and it makes sense that introducing changes from a different evolutionary path might have negative consequences. Think about it. Neanderthal brains evolved under completely different conditions than ours. They lived in small groups in Ice Age Europe, dealing with different day lengths, different diets, different social structures. Some researchers think the Neanderthal variants that increase depression risk might be related to circadian rhythm genes, the biological clock that responds to sunlight. What worked for survival in prehistoric Europe might be a liability in our modern world of artificial lights and office jobs. Actually, that's probably understating it. These genes can influence whether someone becomes addicted to nicotine, their risk of developing psychiatric conditions, and even subtle aspects of mood regulation. The skin deep effects. Let me ask you something. Do you burn easily in the sun? Can't seem to get a tan no matter how hard you try? Well, about 66% of Europeans carry a Neanderthal genetic variant that makes them more prone to childhood sunburns and gives them a poor tanning ability. This isn't just about vanity or beach season frustration. This is about evolution in action. When modern humans moved from sunny Africa to cloudy Europe 45,000 years ago, they faced a serious problem: not enough sunlight to produce vitamin D. The Neanderthals had already solved this problem over hundreds of thousands of years. Their skin was adapted to maximize UV absorption in low-light conditions. So when our ancestors met and mingled with Neanderthals, they didn't just share stories around the campfire. They shared genetic solutions. The pale, sun-sensitive skin that many Europeans have today, that's Neanderthal engineering, tested and refined over millennia. But there's a catch. What helped our ancestors survive in prehistoric Europe can cause problems today. Those same Neanderthal genes that affect skin biology increase the risk of keratosis, those scaly, sometimes precancerous skin lesions that dermatologists worry about. They make some people more likely to develop skin conditions that were probably rare when humans spent less time in the sun and died younger. The technology revolution. The methods scientists use to detect Neanderthal DNA in modern genomes are mind-blowing. It's not like there's a label saying this bit came from Neanderthals. Instead, researchers use statistical methods to identify sequences that look subtly different from typical human variation. The new I-bead mix method can identify segments of DNA that are identical by descent, inherited from the same ancient source. It's like finding sentences in a modern book that match sentences in an ancient manuscript, even when both have been copied and recopied with small changes over millennia. These computational methods are so sophisticated that researchers can now identify Neanderthal DNA in African populations, which was thought impossible just a few years ago. Turns out there was back migration from Eurasia to Africa carrying Neanderthal DNA with it. Even populations with no direct Neanderthal ancestors have about 0.3 to 0.5% Neanderthal DNA. In 2022, Pablo won the Nobel Prize for this work. The committee recognized that he had achieved something seemingly impossible, sequencing the genome of an extinct relative and proving that they gave us DNA that still affects our lives today. It's a discovery that fundamentally changed how we understand human evolution and our place in the natural world. The metabolic mystery. Your Neanderthal inheritance affects how your body processes food in ways that scientists are just beginning to understand. One fascinating example involves the AMY1 gene, which produces amylase, the enzyme in your saliva that starts breaking down starches when you eat. For the longest time, scientists thought humans evolved extra copies of this gene when we developed agriculture. More amylase meant better starch digestion, which would be advantageous when grains became a dietary staple. Makes sense, right? Wrong. New research from 2024 shows that both Neanderthals and modern humans were already carrying multiple copies of the AMY1 gene over 800,000 years ago, long before anyone was farming. This means our common ancestor with Neanderthals was already adapted to eating starchy foods. Perhaps they were processing wild tubers or roots we haven't even considered. But here's where it gets personal. If you're of Latin American descent, you might have a higher risk of type 2 diabetes partly because of a Neanderthal variant in a gene called SLC16A11. This gene affects how your liver processes fats, and what helped Neanderthals survive on their meat-heavy diet might increase diabetes risk in a world of processed foods and sedentary lifestyles. The variant is found in about 50% of indigenous Americans, but almost never in Europeans or Africans. How did it become so common in the Americas if it came from Neanderthals who lived in Europe and Asia? The answer involves a journey of tens of thousands of years. The ancestors of Native Americans picked up this variant from Neanderthals in Asia, then carried it across the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas. The pain paradox. In 2023, researchers made a discovery that sounds almost like science fiction. They found that some people are more sensitive to pain from sharp objects because of their Neanderthal genes. Not emotional pain, not chronic pain, specifically the acute pain you feel when pricked with something sharp. The study focused on Latin Americans who carry one of three variants of a gene called SCN9A. This gene is basically the volume knob for pain signals in your nervous system. The Neanderthal version is turned up higher. Now, you might think being more sensitive to pain is purely negative. But Kostub Adhikari from University College London makes an important point. Pain obviously affects survival chances, so it makes sense it would be evolutionarily conserved. Think about it from a Neanderthal perspective. You're living in Ice Age Europe, hunting mammoths, working with stone tools, constantly at risk of injury. A heightened pain response might make you more careful, more likely to avoid dangerous situations, more likely to treat injuries quickly. In a world without antibiotics, being super aware of every cut and scrape could save your life. The blood clotting dilemma. One Neanderthal variant speeds up blood clotting. In the Paleolithic period, this was literally a lifesaver. Imagine you're hunting and get gore by an aurochs. Faster clotting means less blood loss, lower infection risk, better survival chances. Natural selection would strongly favor this trait. Today, that same variant increases your risk of strokes, pulmonary embolism, and pregnancy complications. What saved lives 50,000 years ago can end them today. This creates an ethical dilemma for modern medicine. Should we screen for these variants? If someone has the fast-clotting Neanderthal variant, should they take preventive blood thinners? We're essentially having to medically manage our evolutionary heritage. The pregnancy complications are particularly interesting. Some researchers think Neanderthal modern human hybrid pregnancies might have had higher rates of complications, which could partly explain why Neanderthal DNA is depleted in genes related to reproduction. We're still dealing with the echoes of that ancient incompatibility. The addiction connection. Here's something that really surprised researchers. Neanderthal DNA influences addiction risk, particularly for nicotine. Now, obviously, Neanderthals weren't smoking cigarettes. So why would their genes affect nicotine addiction? The answer reveals something profound about how genes work. The same genetic variants that influence one trait can affect completely different traits depending on the environment. The Neanderthal variants linked to nicotine addiction probably affected something else entirely in their original context, maybe neurotransmitter regulation or reward processing in the brain. In a Neanderthal environment, these variants might have been beneficial, perhaps making them more motivated to seek out scarce food resources or more resistant to certain plant toxins. But introduce modern substances like nicotine, and those same variants become a liability. This is happening throughout our genome. Genes that evolved for one purpose are being co-opted or misfire in our modern environment. It's like using ancient software to run modern programs. Sometimes it works, sometimes it crashes, sometimes it does something completely unexpected. The geographic puzzle. One of the most puzzling aspects of Neanderthal DNA distribution is why East Asians have about 20% more of it than Europeans. I mean, Neanderthals lived primarily in Europe and Western Asia. You'd expect Europeans to have more Neanderthal DNA, not less. The leading theory involves multiple waves of interbreeding and population dynamics that honestly make my head spin. But here's the simple version. After the initial interbreeding event around 50,000 years ago, the ancestors of East Asians might have mixed with Neanderthals a second time. Or, and this is where it gets complicated, the ancestors of Europeans mixed with another group of modern humans who had no Neanderthal DNA, diluting their Neanderthal percentage. Recent studies using new computational methods suggest the difference might not be as large as we thought. The new IBEAD mix method shows more uniform levels of Neanderthal ancestry across Eurasian populations. Sometimes the tools we use to measure things influence what we think we're seeing. But wait, There's another player in this game: Melanesians, the indigenous peoples of Papua New Guinea and nearby islands, carry about 2 to 3% DNA from another extinct human species, the Denisovans. Add that to their Neanderthal DNA, and they have more archaic human DNA than anyone else on Earth. They're like a living museum of human evolution. The fertility factor. Here's something that might make you uncomfortable. Neanderthal DNA could be affecting human fertility, especially in men. Researchers discovered something striking. Neanderthal DNA has been almost completely eliminated from certain parts of our genome, particularly the X chromosome and genes expressed in the testes. This isn't random. When two species that have been evolving separately for hundreds of thousands of years interbreed, the hybrid offspring often have fertility problems. It's called hybrid incompatibility, and it's why mules, horse-donkey hybrids, are sterile. The human Neanderthal hybrids weren't sterile. Obviously, we're here as proof. But they likely had reduced fertility, especially the males. Over thousands of generations, natural selection weeded out the Neanderthal variants that interfered most with reproduction. The fact that we see this pattern so clearly in the genome is actually evidence of how significant the fertility cost was. Actually, I should clarify something. Some fertility clinics are starting to consider ancient DNA in their assessments, not as a primary factor, but as one piece of a complex puzzle. If a couple both carry certain Neanderthal variants, it might slightly increase their risk of miscarriage or reduce conception rates. The autoimmune double edge. Remember those powerful immune system genes we inherited from Neanderthals? Well, there's a dark side to that inheritance. When your immune system is too strong, it can turn against your own body, causing autoimmune diseases. Research from 2014 found that certain Neanderthal variants increase risk of lupus and inflammatory bowel disease. The variant linked to lupus is carried by about 10% of Europeans. The one linked to bowel disease? About 26% of Europeans and 8% of East Asians have it. Think about the irony here. The same genes that helped our ancestors survive new pathogens when they entered Europe and Asia now cause our immune systems to attack our own tissues. It's like inheriting a really powerful security system that occasionally mistakes you for an intruder. This pattern appears again and again with Neanderthal genes. What was adaptive becomes maladaptive. What saved lives now threatens them. Evolution prepared us for a world that no longer exists, and we're paying the price in modern diseases. The depression genes. Let's dive deeper into how Neanderthal genes affect mental health, because this is where things get really complex. That study of 28,000 Americans I mentioned, it found that Neanderthal variants don't just influence whether you get depression, they influence what kind of depression you might get. Some Neanderthal variants are associated with seasonal affective disorder, which makes sense given that Neanderthals evolved in northern latitudes with extreme seasonal variations. Other variants are linked to major depressive disorder that isn't seasonal. The researchers found enrichment of Neanderthal DNA near genes involved in circadian rhythms, your biological clock, but also near genes involved in neurotransmitter production and regulation. It's not just about when you sleep. It's about the fundamental chemistry of mood. What's particularly interesting is that some Neanderthal variants increase depression risk, while others decrease it. It's like inheriting a complex set of mental health influences, some protective, some harmful, all interacting in ways we don't fully understand. The personal testing revolution. You can now spit in a tube, mail it to a company, and find out your personal Neanderthal percentage. 23andMe, for instance, tells customers how many Neanderthal variants they carry compared to other users. It's become a sort of party trick. I'm more Neanderthal than 75% of customers. But this raises serious questions. What does it mean to tell someone they have genes that increase their depression risk or make them more likely to become addicted to nicotine? How do we communicate this information responsibly? And there's a danger in oversimplification. Your Neanderthal DNA doesn't determine your fate. It's one factor among thousands. Having a Neanderthal variant that increases depression risk doesn't mean you'll definitely develop depression. It just shifts the probabilities slightly. I sometimes worry we're creating a new form of genetic determinism, where people blame their Neanderthal ancestors for their modern problems. Of course, I'm depressed. I'm 3% Neanderthal. That's not how it works. Your choices, experiences, and environment matter far more than these ancient genetic variants. The medical revolution. We're entering an era where ancient DNA isn't just about understanding the past. It's about improving the future. Researchers are studying Neanderthal variants to develop new medical treatments, understand disease mechanisms, and predict drug responses. For example, the Neanderthal variants that affect immune response to viruses might help us design better vaccines. Understanding how Neanderthal genes influence drug metabolism could help personalize medication dosages. There's even research into whether Neanderthal variants affect response to anesthesia. Imagine your anesthesiologist checking your Neanderthal profile before surgery to optimize your sedation. We're not there yet, but it's not science fiction anymore. What really excites me is the possibility of using this knowledge for prevention. If we know someone carries Neanderthal variants that increase clotting risk, we can monitor them more closely, recommend lifestyle changes, maybe prescribe preventive medications. We're turning evolutionary baggage into actionable medical intelligence. The morning reality. Let me walk you through a typical morning, but with a twist. Every single thing you do might be influenced by your Neanderthal DNA. You wake up groggy because your Neanderthal circadian rhythm genes are calibrated for different day lengths than your modern life provides. You stumble to the bathroom where your skin, its thickness, oil production, and sensitivity to products, has been shaped by Neanderthal keratin genes. You eat breakfast, and your ability to digest those carbs depends partly on ancient amylase gene duplications that Neanderthals also carried. You take your daily medications, and here's where it gets really interesting. Researchers are discovering that Neanderthal variants affect how we metabolize certain drugs. Your optimal dose of some medications might be different because of genes inherited from extinct humans. You check the weather and grab sunscreen because you burn easily. Thank your Neanderthal ancestors for that. You feel a twinge in your back, and your pain sensitivity might be dialed up by that Neanderthal SCN9A variant. Even your mood as you head to work could be influenced by Neanderthal variants affecting neurotransmitter regulation. We're not separate from our evolutionary history. We're living it every single day. The unexpected connections. Scientists keep finding Neanderthal influences in the most unexpected places. Recent research suggests Neanderthal variants might affect your response to caffeine. Some people metabolize caffeine faster than others. And while we don't have definitive proof yet, there are hints that Neanderthal variants in liver enzymes might play a role. Your body odor? Genes affecting apocrine gland function and bacterial populations on your skin show signatures of Neanderthal introgression. Your natural scent might be partly Neanderthal. Your sleep patterns go beyond just circadian rhythms. Neanderthal variants might influence how much sleep you need, how deeply you sleep, and whether you're a morning person or night owl. Even your alcohol tolerance might be affected. Alcohol dehydrogenase genes, which break down alcohol, show some Neanderthal influence, though the effects are still being studied. Actually, wait. I need to be careful here. Not all of these connections are definitively proven. Science journalism sometimes exaggerates preliminary findings. But the patterns researchers are seeing suggest Neanderthal DNA influences far more traits than we initially realized. The athletic performance angle. Here's something that doesn't get talked about much. Neanderthal DNA might affect athletic performance. Neanderthals were incredibly strong. Their bones show muscle attachments that suggest strength far exceeding modern humans. They were built for power, not endurance. Some researchers hypothesize that certain Neanderthal variants might influence muscle fiber composition, favoring fast-twitch fibers over slow-twitch. This would mean some people might be naturally better at powerlifting than marathon running, partly because of their Neanderthal inheritance. There's also the question of injury recovery. Those blood clotting variants that cause problems in our sedentary world, they might actually be advantageous for contact sport athletes who need to recover quickly from injuries. Faster wound healing, stronger inflammatory responses. These could be performance enhancing in certain contexts. But let's be honest, we don't have definitive proof that Neanderthal DNA significantly affects athletic performance. This is still speculative. But given what we know about Neanderthal physiology and the genes we've inherited, it would be surprising if there weren't some effects. The social implications. What happens when genetic ancestry becomes part of social identity? We're already seeing people proudly announce their Neanderthal percentage on social media. More Neanderthal than you has become a weird flex. But there's a darker side to this. History shows us what happens when genetic differences become social markers. Could Neanderthal percentage become another way to divide people? Could it be used to explain away social problems through genetic determinism? I've seen online discussions where people blame their social awkwardness on being too Neanderthal. That's not just scientifically inaccurate, it's dangerous. It reduces complex human behavior to simple genetic causes and ignores the vast influence of culture, experience, and choice. There's also the question of genetic discrimination. If Neanderthal variants increase disease risk, could insurance companies use this information? Could employers? We need legal frameworks to prevent genetic discrimination based on ancient DNA just as much as modern DNA. The conservation paradox. Here's a thought that keeps me up at night. We might be losing Neanderthal DNA. Every generation, natural selection continues to act on our genomes. Neanderthal variants that are even slightly disadvantageous in modern environments gradually become rarer. Some researchers estimate we've already lost 10 to 20% of the Neanderthal DNA that initially entered our gene pool. In another few thousand years, we might lose much more. We're witnessing ongoing extinction at the genetic level. This raises interesting conservation questions. Should we preserve Neanderthal DNA? Not just in databases, but in living humans? It sounds like science fiction, but some bioethicists are seriously discussing whether we have an obligation to preserve the genetic diversity we inherited from extinct humans. Think about it. Neanderthals aren't completely extinct. Their genetic legacy lives on in billions of people. We are, in a very real sense, the last refuge of Neanderthal DNA. Collectively, modern humans preserve about 35 to 40% of the Neanderthal genome. Each person carries different fragments, like pages from a scattered book. The ethical dilemmas. As we learn more about Neanderthal DNA's effects, we face difficult ethical questions. Should parents be able to select embryos based on Neanderthal variants? If we can identify variants that increase depression risk, is there an obligation to inform people? What about variants that affect intelligence or personality? Gene editing technology like CRISPR raises even more complex questions. Should we be able to edit out Neanderthal variants that cause disease? What about variants that are merely suboptimal in modern environments? Where do we draw the line? There's also the question of ownership. Who owns the Neanderthal genome? If a company develops a treatment based on understanding Neanderthal variants, who benefits? These aren't abstract questions. They're becoming real policy issues as ancient DNA research advances. The most challenging question might be this: if we can resurrect extinct species using genetic technology, should we bring back Neanderthals? We have enough of their genome preserved in modern humans to theoretically reconstruct much of it. But should we? The ethical implications are staggering. The global health perspective. The story of Neanderthal DNA is really a story about human migration and adaptation. Every population tells a different chapter, and these differences have real health implications. Take the COVID-19 risk variant on chromosome 3. It reaches 63% frequency in Bangladesh, but is almost absent in East Asia. This means pandemic response strategies might need to consider ancient genetic heritage. A one-size-fits-all approach to public health ignores these deep genetic differences. Similarly, the diabetes risk variant in Latin Americans requires culturally sensitive health interventions. Telling someone their diabetes risk is partly due to Neanderthal genes requires careful communication to avoid stigma while providing useful health information. This has implications for what researchers call precision medicine, tailoring medical treatment to genetic background. A drug that works well for someone with one set of Neanderthal variants might work poorly for someone with different variants. We're moving toward medicine that considers not just your personal genetics, but your ancient genetic heritage. The research revolution. The pace of discovery in this field is absolutely staggering. When I started researching this topic, the latest papers were from 2023. Now, as I'm writing this, new discoveries from 2024 have already changed our understanding. The most recent finding that human Neanderthal interbreeding lasted 7,000 years completely changes our picture of how the two species interacted. It wasn't a brief encounter. It was a long-term relationship spanning hundreds of generations. New computational methods are finding Neanderthal DNA in unexpected places. Improved ancient DNA extraction techniques are giving us higher quality Neanderthal genomes. Machine learning is identifying subtle patterns of introgression we couldn't see before. Every few months brings revelations that would have been Nobel Prize-worthy discoveries just a decade ago. We're living through a genuine scientific revolution in our understanding of human evolution. The future of medicine. What excites me most is how this knowledge might transform healthcare. Imagine a future where your medical treatment is informed not just by your family history, but by your ancient genetic heritage. Your doctor might say, based on your Neanderthal profile, you're at higher risk for blood clots, but lower risk for certain viral infections. Let's adjust your prevention strategy accordingly. Or this antidepressant might work better for you because of your specific Neanderthal variants affecting serotonin regulation. Pharmaceutical companies are already investigating whether Neanderthal variants affect drug efficacy. Some medications might need different dosing or might not work at all, depending on your ancient DNA. This could explain why some drugs work brilliantly for some people, but fail completely for others. We might even develop new treatments inspired by Neanderthal biology. Those super-responsive immune variants, they might teach us new ways to fight infections. The efficient fat metabolism genes, they might inspire treatments for metabolic disorders. The identity question. Here's something I think about often. What does it mean for our sense of identity that we carry DNA from extinct humans? We're not purely Homo sapiens. We're hybrids carrying genetic echoes of species that no longer exist. For most of human history, we thought of ourselves as special, separate, created distinct from all other creatures. The discovery of evolution challenged that, but we could still say we were the only humans left. Now we know that's not entirely true either. We carry our extinct relatives within us. Some people find this disturbing. Others find it connecting, a reminder that human history is more complex and intertwined than we imagined. Personally, I find it kind of amazing. Every person of non-African descent is a living monument to an ancient collaboration between species. It also changes how we think about extinction. Are Neanderthals really extinct if their genes live on? If their biological innovations continue to influence billions of lives? In a sense, we haven't just inherited their DNA. We've become their evolutionary legacy, the ultimate message. As we reach the end of this journey through your Neanderthal inheritance, let's confront what this all means. You are not just human. You are a mosaic of evolutionary history. Your body is a living archive of ancient adaptations, successful experiments, and biological compromises made tens of thousands of years ago. Every trait influenced by Neanderthal DNA tells a story. Your immune system's overreaction to allergens? That's the price of inheriting a pathogen-fighting system honed in prehistoric Europe. Your sensitivity to pain? That's an ancient warning system that once meant the difference between life and death. Your risk of depression? That might be the mismatch between genes evolved for one world trying to function in another. But here's what I want you to remember. This knowledge is power. Understanding your ancient genetic heritage isn't about genetic determinism or fatal flaws. It's about understanding the full complexity of what makes you human. It's about appreciating the deep history written in your cells. The next time you get a genetic test, remember, you're not just learning about yourself. You're reading a story that stretches back 50,000 years to when two human species met and created something new. You're part of that story. The evidence is written in every cell of your body. We are all carrying pieces of the past into the future. The question isn't whether we have Neanderthal DNA. It's what we do with that knowledge. How we use it to improve health, understand ourselves better, and appreciate the beautiful complexity of human evolution. Because in the end, the story of Neanderthal DNA isn't really about extinct humans. It's about us, modern humans trying to understand ourselves, our health, our place in nature. It's about recognizing that we're not the end point of evolution, but part of an ongoing story that began long before us and will continue long after. Your Neanderthal inheritance isn't just ancient history. It's living biology, active in your body right now, influencing your life in ways we're only beginning to understand. And that, I think, is absolutely remarkable.